Oh, hi, Rach. So it's my role to get my clients' ads in front of the right people at the right time. But consumer behaviour is more unpredictable than ever right now. So how can we bring our brand top of mind when they're at the point of purchase?
Welcome to Rethink, a podcast by Think with Google. I'm Rachel Corbett and Lord knows how I make my purchase decisions. One day I'm Googling something I think I want, then 3 hours later I'm down the rabbit hole looking at something entirely unrelated, thinking to myself, what did I come here for? If you think your customers are going on a journey that involves the process me like, me buy, you have way oversimplified things. So to help us work out what the heck is going on in our own minds when we're deciding to buy things, let's bring in some expertise. Rhys Williams is the Director of Specialist Sales at Google in Australia and New Zealand. He heads up a team that helps advertisers marry the right media with their marketing strategies, and he's got the skinny on what we really do on our winding path to purchase.
Traditionally in marketing, I guess we talk about people moving through a purchase funnel. It goes something along the lines of, firstly, you are aware of a product and you've been exposed to some ads. Then you might narrow that down to consider some more products, and then you go a little bit further narrowing and get to your shortlist. And then finally, you take some action and buy the product. And that's an easy, linear product funnel that marketers can plan around and follow along with. But more recently, I think this idea that consumer behaviour doesn't kind of map that funnel, and some research that was done recently support this. And the steps between being exposed to advertising and then kind of, triggering that process and then buying something are not linear in between. In fact, it's a real mess. They call it the messy middle in between those two purchases.
Ooh, the messy middle. Finally, a term that reflects my purchase journey. Anyway, Rhys, just wanted to let you know I feel seen and heard. Carry on.
There's this concept of exposure, that we're exposed to brands all the time. Just in the world, there's stuff you already know about brands, there's stuff your family and friends tell you. You have all your own biases already, and you probably have some preferences. And it's true for big purchases like a home loan, or small purchases like buying something from the shops, like an impulse decision. And some of the research mapped out how that pathway might work. 1 out of every 3 consumers will choose their second choice of preferred brand over their first choice, just purely by the second choice being there and the first choice not. It's enough for 1 out of 3 people.
Turns out not even the people who study the impact of the messy middle are immune to its effects. Cue Rhys's own working from home inspired meandering purchase journey.
So I thought, okay, well, I'll invest in a nice stand-up desk. I had all my own biases, and I went to all the usual kind of stores that I would have gone to, the retailers that I know, and, found some good desks. But then I came across, just through searching, a small, unique, custom-made furniture shop based out of Melbourne. And they had the most beautiful desks and all these kind of different options, and they had stuff in stock, whereas some of the bigger retailers didn't have things in stock. And so I kind of went back into this exploration mode, because I thought, well, now I could have a much nicer desktop than I had originally imagined. And the fact that they were in stock and they had something unique, that kind of tipped me over into that sale. And that whole process took me a couple of weeks, but that really wasn't a linear purchase path that I took.
So basically, we're all a lot more complex than we think we are, and it becomes even easier to head off into the weeds when we're shopping online, a pastime that's become even more popular as wandering the shops on a Sunday arvo isn't quite as simple as it used to be.
So not a surprise with many retail stores being closed that we see a massive uptick in researching online, browsing and researching. But I think interestingly, 63% of Aussies are claiming that the way that they shop had changed just a bit, but around 15% said that it changed a lot. And around 30% of Australians said that they would continue to shop online post the pandemic whenever it returns to whatever the new normal is. So some of those behaviour changes we might see stick. And it's not new that people are researching online. I mean, that's been around for quite some time. I think what's new is now that stores are closed, there is only one way to buy, which is online.
So if consumers aren't even sure how they ended up pressing the buy now button, how can you make predictions about where they might be so you can show up there? Enter Mike Daniels, founder of the Behavioural Architects, the company behind the Messy Middle research. They use behavioural science to understand and change consumer behaviour. And they found that what we think and what we do are actually very different.
Traditionally, it's been thought that people are experts in their own behaviour and why they do one thing rather than another, and all you need to do is just ask them. That's the basis, really, of so much of traditional market research. Turns out it's kind of wrong. And a lot of what we've seen in behavioural science in the last sort of 15, 20 years, where there's really just been an explosion of insight, is that what people say about their behaviour or what they think they will do when asked a question about things isn't really supported by the data.
In other words, we've got no idea what we're doing, but my seemingly rudderless path to purchase has more structure than you might think, and you can disrupt it by focusing on the 7 key principles that influence behaviour.
So those principles are then, firstly, something we call brand presence, and this is the idea that people like and trust what they're familiar with. So simply being there, simply showing up is critical. If you're not there, if you don't have brand presence, then sorry, you're not going to do well. Second of those 7 principles is called heuristics. Difficult word, but what it means is rules of thumb and shortcuts. We tend to be very influenced by things that save us from having to think too much. How you might see that in practice, say you're shopping for wine. I'm not someone who particularly knows very much about wine, though I quite like it. What's really helpful is when you see something like a gold award, that's a heuristic on a bottle label, because it kind of immediately, just quickly, is a shortcut for this is quality. So that becomes really important. The third area, social norms. So when we are in doubt, we look to the behaviour of the majority or of other people to guide us. Even though, we like to think of ourselves as independently minded and, if I said to someone, are you influenced by what other people are doing? They go, no, I'm a man or a woman of my own mind. Culturally, we don't like to project a view of ourselves being influenced by other people, but we are. And there's a huge body of scientific evidence that shows how when you communicate what majority behaviours are, you influence the behaviour of others. The fourth principle is authority bias, somewhat self-evident, but we are influenced by experts and people that we perceive to be an authority in an area. So that kind of endorsement is a very, very powerful thing.
So what I'm hearing is that there are 4 principles that prove that we are not quite as smart as we think we are. Sure, I might think I'm too savvy to be influenced by your wily ways, but if you stick a gold medal on something or give it a 5-star rating, or if I hear everybody's buying it, I'm a high chance of getting out my credit card. And we haven't even gotten to the other principles yet.
The next 3 can be thought about in a different way, in that these are principles that convey what we call an irrational level of excitement. That can kind of pull someone out of this indecisive loop and pull them into a purchase decision very, very quickly. The first of them is called power of now. And this is about our desire, really, to want nice things right now and to put off unpleasant things till tomorrow. And so the more that you can emphasize immediacy, people are irrationally influenced. So instant downloads, next day delivery, these sorts of things become very, very important. The second of these final 3 principles is scarcity bias. Again, it's a bit self-evident. We've seen it recently, obviously at the start of the COVID situation with the running out of loo paper, because people, oh my God, it's running out, it's really important, I've got to stock up. This irrational value is created when we think things are scarce. You can probably start to see the kind of survival value in suddenly getting very interested in a resource that you consider to be scarce.
Yes, because Lord knows how we would have survived coronavirus without 7,000 rolls of toilet paper crammed into our garage. So now it's time for the final principle, and I don't think this one is going to surprise anyone.
The power of free. And like the power of now, this has this extraordinary immediacy of effect. When something is free, it's a hot button that explodes with what I like to call behavioural power, because more so than any kind of discount, just that idea of something that's free, something for nothing, zero price, is really attractive to people. We just love it. And there's been some interesting experiments that have shown how once you make something free, you can flip decision making and attract people really, really quickly.
We're simple creatures, really. So let's put this into practice with a real world example. If you're a fan of a single malt, my Mike's done a little research on you.
When it comes to shopping for whiskies, looking at the way people behave is very, very interesting because whiskey is an expensive purchase. You can get it wrong and spend a lot of money buying something, if you're unfamiliar with it, that is risky. So that principle of brand presence is really important. People tend to go into bottle shops buying this time what they bought last time, because the decision is based on an authority, a friend or a father, or you've tried it before. And when you go in store, and we notice this using mobile eye tracking, so we get people to wear glasses that record field of view and are also calibrated to show pupil movement. So when you play back the videos, you can see a red dot on the screen of field of view that shows precisely what people are looking at.
The eyes never lie. So what did Mike discover when they looked at the data?
When people are looking at a wall of whiskies, first thing they do is kind of screen everything out. They don't see the range of everything. Their eye goes to familiar brands that they've seen before. The rest of it just gets screened out. So brand presence becomes important, the authority bias, if there's a label or an award. So that's a category, I think, where messy middle kind of happens, and then price comes into play and potentially it kind of gets popped into the basket as well.
So that's what happens when we're wandering into a bottle shop trying to make a cheeky purchase for a Saturday night. But it's not just our purchase decisions where the messy middle comes into play. It also influences our decision-making when we're dealing with situations that have an impact on our everyday life, something governments have had to unfortunately get very familiar with this year. And one place everyone's looked to when working out the best way to handle an unexpected global pandemic is where we find our next guest.
I'm joining you from Wellington in New Zealand. Beautiful capital city, though not so beautiful today. It's true to form. It's very windy. It's very grey. It's very miserable. It's feeling like summer is a long, long way away.
Gemma Bennett was the campaign lead for Unite Against COVID-19, the New Zealand government's crisis response that played a huge role in achieving over 100 days without community transmission. So how did she go about galvanising a team of 5 million Kiwis?
It was really clear really early on that every New Zealander was going to have the role to play if we were going to successfully respond to the pandemic. So we knew that we needed to go further than simply providing information. We needed to move much further into engagement and behaviour change. We needed to enable them to act in a way that would not only minimise the impacts of COVID-19 on New Zealand, but we were really clear that we wanted to maintain social cohesion through that as well. The campaign had 4 key roles: to inform, to ensure compliance, to reassure, and to enable.
Naturally, with a campaign like this, you need that feedback loop of, is this effective? Is it working? How do we make those adjustments as we go along? How were you tracking the effectiveness?
On the daily, we're using insight to inform what we were doing. So we used Google Trends, we used social listening and media analytics to track, but we also had real-world data. For example, enforcement data from the police. So we knew if people were breaking the conditions of lockdown, or if we had other operational processes that were put in place, other government agencies could tell us if New Zealanders were responding to that or not. So all of that informed the way we developed and refined messaging, and also the way we sort of tested our daily messaging. But COVID-19 was and is the discussion that New Zealanders were having. So we really knew if things weren't landing. We heard loud and clear from New Zealanders if we'd gotten things wrong.
What are some of the challenges that you had in speaking to an entire population rather than certain segments of that population? Because there is a varied bunch of individuals in the population of a country.
So that first rule you kind of have in marketing is, really focus and target on your specific audience. This really was every New Zealander. I think that the key challenge was getting the right balance in the message between providing enough information and context, so the why we're asking you to do this, whilst also keeping it clear and simple, and then having the right mix of empathy but also authority And we're lucky. I just think that's where great design and copywriting skill makes all the difference, actually, because there's a real sweet spot in between all of those things that helps your message appeal to a really broad audience.
So what you're saying is as important as always, especially when people's health is at risk. And when the stakes are that high, you really need to make sure people get the message, which means you've got to meet them where they are.
The situation was pushing more people online. So we worked really hard to ensure our digital and social channels were really aligned with our website so people could easily find what they needed. But I think the way that we responded to that, and particularly initially, was by using influencers to share our message in their own voice. And that meant that we could reach into broader communities than a government brand would have been able to.
I mean, you get the beloved All Blacks to post about it and you're sure to get more uptake than an ad that has that random voice at the end saying, this message was authorised by the New Zealand government. But as marketers, you're used to identifying who your potential customers are and then tailoring your messages to speak directly to them. But how the heck do you do that when you're speaking to, well, everyone?
We knew it was going to be messy from the outset, and we knew that we had a lot of different people that we were speaking to. So I think we came to the development of the message knowing that we had to be really agile and we needed to be able to tweak and amend as we went along.
So when you're talking to an entire country, you've got to make sure you are addressing each individual community the right way. But sometimes the message that you think they need to hear has unintended consequences, like Gemma found out when they were speaking to people over 70.
So our initial information and messaging was really framed around telling that audience to look after themselves by staying home. And that felt really straightforward to us. It felt like we were speaking directly to the impacted audience and we were talking to them about keeping themselves safe, things that were for the benefit of them. Great, tick that box, we've done that. But the data and insight that we were receiving was showing us that for that group, the reality of the lack of social connection and the impact of loneliness on individuals' well-being was far outweighing any perceived threat of potentially catching COVID. So we had to really shift our entire approach for that audience to being one where we were speaking directly to the audience about what we felt was an action that would benefit them, to the rest of the community, actually, to saying we need you to look out and reach out safely to people who are 70 plus, because it's that social connection that will enable them to feel connected, less lonely, and able to stay home and look after their physical well-being.
As marketers, it's not often that your messages to consumers are a matter of life and death. But when it comes to a global pandemic, the consequences are much more serious, which is why every decision needs to be backed by research.
We had some behavioural and clinical psychologists who'd provided really great advice to us about what impacts behaviour, not just at the individual level, but at the collective level. So right from the outset of the name of the campaign, we made COVID-19 the enemy, but twisted it so that the way we were combating that was positive. I think the effort on the why was useful. So, for example, we didn't just say, make sure you wash your hands regularly. We'd say, wash your hands regularly because it bursts the bubble around the virus and it will help you kill off the virus if it's there. So we just wanted to empower people so that they weren't paralysed with fear of this thing that is really full on, quite serious. We deliberately tapped into the sort of caring Kiwi attitude and the sense of team, and being in service of each other and care for each other is so embedded into Māori and Pacific cultures here. Our love of team sport, which I think, we've got across Australia as well.
And if that doesn't make you yearn for the Trans-Tasman travel bubble, nothing will. So, whether you're selling whiskey or trying to get people to help you fight a global pandemic, you need to gather insights into the people you're speaking to so you can know where to find them and how to speak to them in the most effective way. And while the non-linear purchase journey might feel like it's completely unpredictable, those 7 principles Mike took us through can help you get people's attention even if they don't know what they're doing. And if you're thinking, I really want to dive a little deeper into this messy middle business, I've got you. We've dropped some extra reading in the description of this episode. Gold star for you, study bug. Right, you go and read up on the messy middle research, and then you see if you can find me on the meandering purchase journey I'll be on tonight. I'll give you a hint, I'll be starting at the whiskey aisle. You've been listening to Rethink, a podcast by Think with Google. I have been your host, Rachel Corbett, and don't forget to hit subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Share the show with your friends and leave a little review if you're digging it. This podcast was brought to you by Think with Google. It was created by The Hallway and Eardrum in partnership with Google and produced by Eardrum. The executive producer was Ralph Van Dyke. Producer was Sarah Mashman. Project manager was Jesse Williams. The Air on a G-String theme was Rethought by Tucker Perry, and the engineer was Adrian Walton.